The silence of deep space enveloped the derelict ship, its faint lights flickering like dying embers in the vast darkness. Inside, Lieutenant Derek Callan worked quickly, his gloved hands searching through a panel of damaged circuitry. He spoke to himself in quiet mutters, a habit he developed during long solo missions. "Come on, you piece of junk. Just a little more." A loud hiss cut him off. The panel sparked, then went dark entirely. Derek sighed and leaned back, resting on his heels. He was about to try again when a faint, crackling transmission interrupted his thoughts. "Hello? Is anyone out there?" The voice was unlike any he'd heard before, sharp and melodious, with a layered resonance that sounded almost like two voices speaking in harmony. For a moment, he thought it was interference. But then it came again, clearer this time. "I repeat, is anyone receiving this transmission? My vessel is in critical condition. Please respond." Derek's fingers hovered over the comms unit. He glanced at his ship's readouts, confirming that the signal was close. Too close to ignore. "This is Lieutenant Derek Callan of the Earth Federation Explorer Corps. I'm reading you. What's your situation?" There was a brief silence, then a reply. "My propulsion systems have failed, and my power core is destabilizing. I require immediate assistance." "Understood. Transmitting my coordinates now," Derek said. He worked quickly to input a docking trajectory, his ship's navigation systems groaning in protest as he pushed them to their limits. As Derek guided his vessel toward the source of the distress call, the outline of another ship came into view. A sleek, silvery craft that looked far more advanced than his own. Its surface was marred by deep scorch marks, and one of its stabilizers hung loosely, sparking against the blackness of space. "Is that your ship I see? The one with the damaged stabilizer?" Derek asked over comms. "Yes," the voice replied. "Be careful. The core is highly unstable." Derek maneuvered carefully, bringing his ship alongside the alien craft. He noticed a faint blue glow emanating from one of the panels, pulsating unevenly. He keyed the comms again. "All right, I'll try to stabilize it, but I'll need you to guide me through your systems." There was a pause. Then the alien voice responded with a note of cautious approval. "Very well. Access the main console on the port side. You will find a panel marked with 3 concentric circles. Open it and look for a control unit with a red indicator." Derek suited up and crossed the narrow gap between the ships, his magnetic boots clicking against the alien hull. When he found the panel described, he opened it, revealing a complex array of devices that looked nothing like the technology he knew. "Okay, I see the control unit. What do I do next?" he asked, his voice steady. "You must reroute the power flow from the core to the auxiliary grid. It will slow the destabilization process. Turn the 3 dials clockwise until you hear a low hum, then pull the blue lever upward." Derek followed the instructions, though the controls felt strange in his hands. The dials resisted at first, then clicked into place. A deep hum filled the corridor, and the glowing blue light began to steady. "I think it's working," he said. "What's next?" "Good. Now return to your ship and prepare to tow mine to a safer location," the alien voice instructed. Derek hesitated. "You're alone on that ship, right? Shouldn't you evacuate before we move it?" "I can't leave," the voice replied firmly. "The core must remain under constant monitoring until we reach safety." "I will stay." "Understood. I'll be back on my ship in a minute," Derek said. As he moved back through the docking bay, he glanced toward the source of the voice. He caught a glimpse through a small viewport, a figure with a tall, slender frame and luminescent skin. She was seated at a console, her hands moving deftly across the controls. "Thank you," the voice said, softer now. "I didn't expect a human to respond so quickly." Derek smiled faintly. "Guess we're full of surprises." "Perhaps," she replied, a hint of curiosity creeping into her tone. "But we have little time to dwell on that. Begin the tow procedure immediately." "Got it," Derek said, returning to his ship. As he powered up the engines, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was only the beginning of something much larger. Chapter 2. A Scientist's Skepticism. Back in the relative safety of Derek's small, rugged starship, the two unlikely companions found themselves in a quiet standoff of sorts. Dr. Elise Zervala was perched at the edge of a worn metal bench in the ship's common room, her shimmering skin catching the faint glow of the overhead lights. Across from her, Derek leaned against a console, his arms crossed, watching her with equal parts curiosity and wariness. "So," Derek began, his tone light but probing, "who are you exactly? And why were you out there alone?" Elise's luminescent eyes narrowed slightly. "You do not know me? Should I?" Derek asked with a slight smirk. "I don't exactly keep up with alien celebrity gossip." Her expression softened, though only marginally. "I am Dr. Elise Zervala, a xenobiologist. My work is known among the scientific community, though I suppose your human researchers are less informed about developments beyond your sphere of influence." "Xenobiologist, huh? Sounds impressive," Derek said, though he couldn't help but feel a bit of skepticism himself. He studied her closely, noting the subtle ridges along her temples and the way her voice carried a layered, almost harmonic quality. "So what were you studying out there that was worth risking your life for?" "My research is complex and highly classified," Elise replied, a trace of defensiveness in her tone. "I would not expect you to understand it." Derek raised an eyebrow. "You don't think humans are capable of understanding your work? I think humans have shown themselves to be, shall we say, more concerned with immediate gratification than long-term advancement," Elise said carefully. "Your species often relies on brute force and opportunism rather than intellect and cooperation." "Wow," Derek said, feigning offense. "That's a pretty harsh assessment. I mean, we're not all savages, you know. Some of us even went to college." Elise tilted her head, her luminous skin catching the light as she regarded him. "And did you attend what you call college?" "I did, actually. Engineering degree. Top of my class," Derek said, leaning forward slightly. "So maybe I'm not as dumb as you think." Elise's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "You have spirit. I will give you that." "Spirit, huh? I'll take it," Derek said, grinning. "But seriously, if we're going to be stuck together for a while, maybe you could give me a hint about what you were doing out there. You know, to pass the time." Elise hesitated. For a moment, Derek thought she might brush him off again. But then she said, "I was investigating the effects of a rare stellar phenomenon on biological matter. The data I hoped to collect could have significant implications for my species' future." "And you were doing it all by yourself? No backup, no team?" "My research is not officially sanctioned," Elise admitted, her voice dropping slightly. "I operate independently." "Ah, so you're a bit of a renegade scientist," Derek said, his grin returning. "I like that. Makes things more interesting." "I would not describe myself as a renegade," Elise said, though there was a hint of amusement in her tone. "I am simply committed to my work." "Committed enough to risk your life, apparently," Derek said. He let the words hang for a moment before continuing. "You know, you're lucky I showed up when I did." "Perhaps," Elise conceded, "though I am still uncertain what motivated you to help me." "Would you rather I hadn't?" Derek asked, his voice teasing but gentle. Elise regarded him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "No," she said quietly. "I suppose I am grateful." "Well, you're welcome," Derek said, giving her a small nod. "I'm not in the habit of leaving people, aliens or otherwise, to fend for themselves in a crisis." The room fell into a brief silence. Derek busied himself with a diagnostic panel, while Elise seemed to study her surroundings with renewed interest. Finally, she broke the quiet. "Your ship is primitive yet functional," she said, her tone carefully neutral. Derek chuckled. "Thanks, I guess. It's not fancy, but it gets the job done." Elise tilted her head slightly. "You seem quite resourceful, despite the limitations of your technology." "Hey, I'll take that as a compliment," Derek said. "And for what it's worth, you're not too bad yourself, Doc." She arched an elegant brow. "Not too bad. I mean, you're a brilliant scientist, right? You had the guts to go out there on your own and try to make a difference. That counts for something. Elise seemed to consider his words before replying. Perhaps there is more to your species than I initially thought. There we go, Derek said with a grin. A tiny spark of approval. I'll take it. Elise's expression softened ever so slightly, and for the first time, Derek thought he saw the faintest flicker of a smile. Chapter 3: Finding Common Ground. Derek crouched under the ship's main console, his hands deep in a tangled mess of wires and conduits. I swear, this thing wasn't half this bad last time I opened it, he muttered. From above, Elise watched with arms crossed, her bioluminescent skin casting a faint glow over the dim control room. Perhaps if you had better maintained your vessel, you would not find yourself in this predicament. Derek shot her a quick glance, raising an eyebrow. You're welcome to help instead of just standing there and critiquing my maintenance habits. I am not an engineer, Elise replied, her tone even. I am a scientist. Great, Derek said, his voice muffled as he leaned further into the console. Maybe you can science the hell out of this fried relay while I try to reroute the power. Elise tilted her head, watching him struggle. I could assist, but I would require you to explain what I must do. Derek straightened up and gave her a long look. All right, here's the deal. This relay is shot, and I need someone to hold these wires in place so I can solder a bypass. It's not glamorous, but it'll get us back online. You think you can handle that? She hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. If you can instruct me precisely, I will attempt it. That's the spirit. Derek grabbed a small soldering tool from his belt and pointed at a bundle of wires. Hold this cluster steady, but don't let them touch each other. I'll handle the rest. Elise crouched down, extending her slender hands toward the wires. Her fingers hovered for a moment before she gently pinched them between her thumb and forefinger. Like this. Perfect, Derek said. Now keep them just like that while I... His hand slipped, and the tool clattered to the floor. Damn it. Elise reached for it. I will retrieve. Got it, Derek interrupted, already picking it up. Thanks anyway. Let's try that again. He leaned in, his shoulder brushing hers as he worked. You know, you're doing better than I expected. I find that most tasks become manageable once they are understood, Elise replied. Your machinery is primitive, but the underlying principles are straightforward. Primitive, huh? Derek smirked. I think that's alien for impressive but not as shiny as ours. It is alien for functional despite its inefficiencies, Elise corrected, her voice carrying a faint note of amusement. Fair enough, Derek said, concentrating on the wires. All right, I think we're good. You can let go now. Elise released the wires and stood, watching as Derek completed the bypass. I must admit, your ability to adapt is unexpected. Adapt or get stranded, Derek replied. Not much of a choice, really. But it is a skill, Elise said. One that many would undervalue. Derek paused, meeting her gaze. You saying I'm undervalued? I am saying, she began, that your actions thus far contradict much of what I have heard about humans. Good to know I'm breaking the stereotype, Derek said. He straightened and wiped his hands on his jumpsuit. All right, that should do it. Let's see if the console lights up. He flipped a switch and the console hummed to life. The room was bathed in a soft glow as the control panels flickered and then stabilized. Derek let out a satisfied sigh. Well, that's a start. Thanks for the assist. Elise inclined her head. It was not unpleasant. High praise, Derek said, grinning. We're making progress, I'd say. I would agree, she replied. Her voice was calm, but there was a subtle warmth to it now, a faint shift from the cold detachment she'd shown before. Derek clapped his hands together. All right, let's see if we can get some propulsion back. You feel like trying your hand at engineering again. I suppose I could offer my assistance, Elise said, her lips curving ever so slightly. If you continue to provide clear instructions. Deal, Derek said. He turned back to the console, a faint smile on his face. Let's keep this thing flying. Chapter 4. An Unexpected Ally. The control panel on the side of the ship lit up like a starlit sky as Derek and Elise worked side by side. Every time a new indicator blinked green, Derek let out a small sound of satisfaction. He was in the middle of replacing yet another finicky module when Elise's voice cut through the quiet. "You mentioned earlier that you were an engineer," she said, her tone casual yet curious. "Why did you choose this profession?" Derek paused, adjusting the module's housing before turning slightly toward her. "You make it sound like I had some big, noble reason. I didn't. I was always good with my hands. Fixing things, tinkering. It just felt natural." Elise tilted her head. "And your government sent you out here alone?" "Not exactly," Derek replied, wiping some grease off his hands. "This was supposed to be a routine patrol. Check in on some mining stations, scout new resource fields, nothing dangerous. But as you can see, things don't always go according to plan. And yet you managed to survive and find me," Elise said, glancing at him. "It is intriguing. Lucky more like," Derek said with a small laugh. "If I'd been 5 minutes slower, you'd have been—" He stopped himself. "Well, let's just say it worked out." Elise studied him for a moment before returning her attention to the panel. "Perhaps your instincts deserve more credit than you give them." Derek snorted. "If you say so, document." They worked in silence for a while, the hum of the ship's systems gradually steadying as they replaced failing components and rerouted power. It wasn't glamorous, but it was progress. Derek found himself glancing at Elise now and then, surprised at how quickly she picked up the basics. "You're pretty quick with this stuff," he remarked as she carefully inserted a new power coupling. "I learn quickly," Elise said simply. "And your instructions have been clear." "Glad I could teach the expert something," Derek said with a grin. "I am an expert in biology," she replied, though her tone was less sharp than before. "This mechanical work is new to me." "Well, you're doing fine," Derek said, nodding toward her handiwork. "We might make an engineer out of you yet." Elise gave him a sidelong glance, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "I doubt I would make a suitable engineer. My interests lie elsewhere." "Fair enough," Derek said. "But it's nice to have someone to share the load." Elise turned back to the panel, her movements precise and deliberate. "Perhaps this cooperation is beneficial to both of us." "That's the spirit," Derek said, his tone light. "See? Working together's not so bad." "It is less frustrating than I anticipated," Elise admitted after a moment. "And it has given me an opportunity to observe your species more closely." "Oh, so I'm a specimen now?" Derek said, raising an eyebrow. Elise's lips curved in a faint, fleeting smile. "You could say that." Derek chuckled, returning to his own task. As they continued their repairs, the tension between them seemed to ease. The initial mistrust and skepticism were giving way to a tentative camaraderie, built not on grand gestures, but on shared effort and a growing understanding of each other's capabilities. By the time they finished, the ship systems were back to functional status. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to keep them moving. Derek leaned back against the bulkhead, letting out a long breath. "Well, that's one more step in the right direction," he said. "Nice work, document." "You were not entirely incompetent," Elise replied, a faint trace of humor in her voice. "I'll take that as a compliment," Derek said, his grin returning. "Who knows? You might actually start liking humans if we keep this up." "Do not let your ego inflate too much," Elise said, though her tone lacked the sharpness it once held. Derek laughed, shaking his head. "I'll try to keep it in check." As they secured the last of their tools and prepared to move on, Derek felt a quiet satisfaction. It wasn't just the repairs or the ship's hum coming back to life. It was the fact that he and Elise, despite their differences, were starting to trust each other. In this uncharted corner of space, that trust felt like something solid, something they could build on. Chapter 5. A Brush with Danger. The distress signal was faint but persistent, pinging their console as they approached a derelict station orbiting a gas giant. Derek frowned at the readout, running a hand through his hair. "Doesn't make sense," he said, leaning closer. This place is supposed to be abandoned. Why is someone calling for help? Perhaps it is a trap, Elise suggested, standing beside him. Or a malfunctioning automated signal. Could be, Derek muttered. But if someone really needs help, he trailed off, glancing at Elise. She raised a ridged brow. You are going to investigate, aren't you? He shrugged. I can't just ignore it. What if someone's stranded over there? Your species' tendency to intervene in every situation is perplexing, she said, though there was no real scorn in her voice this time. Derek smirked. And your species' tendency to overthink everything is charming. Document. Elise tilted her head, her glowing skin catching the faint light from the console. If we are to investigate, we should proceed cautiously. We cannot afford to damage this vessel further. Agreed, Derek said. So let's gear up and check it out. No unnecessary risks. Your definition of unnecessary differs greatly from mine, Elise replied, though she followed him toward the equipment locker. The station's interior was dimly lit and eerily quiet, save for the soft hum of dormant machinery. Derek held his flashlight steady, sweeping the beam across the walls. This place gives me the creeps, he admitted. Looks like it's been abandoned for years. It is not entirely lifeless, Elise said, gesturing toward a console still blinking faintly. Someone has been here recently. Derek approached the console, examining the controls. The distress signals definitely coming from this terminal. He tapped a few buttons, frowning as the interface flickered. Weird. It's encrypted. Ly, her voice low. Hear what? Derek paused, listening. A faint scraping sound echoed through the corridor, growing louder. Stay close, he said, gripping his tool firmly. The sound grew louder, and shadows flickered at the edges of the flashlight's beam. A moment later, a group of armed figures emerged from the darkness. Their features were vaguely humanoid but twisted, with jagged armor and glowing visors. Scavengers, Derek muttered under his breath. One of them raised a weapon, and Derek grabbed Elise's arm, pulling her behind a support pillar. Stay down, he said. I am not a helpless bystander, Elise snapped, but she stayed close as Derek peeked around the corner. The scavengers began spreading out, their voices a guttural mix of growls and clicks. Derek's mind raced. They haven't seen us yet. We can either sneak out the way we came or distract them. Elise finished, her gaze narrowing. If we trigger a systems overload, it may force them to retreat. Derek gave her a look. Are you serious? I can reroute power from the console, she said quickly. It will not cause permanent damage, but it will create a significant burst of light and sound. They will assume the station is unstable. All right, Derek said, exhaling. But if this goes sideways, we're running. Elise nodded and crouched by the console, her fingers moving with practiced precision. Derek kept watch, his tool raised like a makeshift weapon. Ready, she whispered a moment later. Do it, Derek said. The console sparked and whined, and a blinding flash of light filled the room. The scavengers recoiled, their guttural shouts echoing as they scrambled back down the corridor. Now, Derek said, grabbing Elise's hand and pulling her toward the exit. They ran through the station, the echoes of the scavengers fading behind them. By the time they reached their ship, both were breathing hard but unscathed. That was... Derek started, then laughed, shaking his head. That was something. It was effective, Elise said, though her glowing eyes betrayed a flicker of relief. Yeah, it was, Derek said, his grin returning. Good thinking, Document. I'll admit, you're not too bad in a crisis. Elise inclined her head. And you are not as reckless as I initially believed. High praise, Derek said with a smirk. Looks like we make a pretty decent team after all. For now, Elise said, though her tone was lighter than usual. Derek chuckled, turning back to the controls. All right, let's get out of here before they come back for round 2. Chapter 6. Quiet Moments. Derek stretched out on the bench near the ship's observation window, watching the streaks of light as they passed into a calm sector of space. It was rare for him to take a moment to breathe, And now, after the chaos of the scavenger encounter, it felt like he could finally relax. The ship's systems were humming steadily, thanks to Elise's quick thinking and their combined efforts to stabilize everything once they'd escaped the derelict station. Across the room, Elise stood near a terminal, running a diagnostic on her portable data module. The soft glow of her bioluminescent skin reflected faintly against the console, blending with the muted blue lights of the ship's interior. Derek watched her for a moment before speaking. "You ever just stop working and take a minute to enjoy the view?" he asked, gesturing to the observation window. Elise glanced at him, one brow raised. "I find it difficult to sit idly while there is still work to be done. Even after what we just went through?" Derek said with a grin. "I mean, we practically had those scavengers breathing down our necks, and now we're in one piece. Seems like a good time to just unwind for a bit." She hesitated, then closed out her diagnostic and turned to face him. "Perhaps you are right. A brief pause may be beneficial." "Beneficial," Derek repeated with a chuckle. "You know how to sell a good time, document." She stepped closer to the observation window, her hands clasped behind her back. "The view is calming," she admitted after a moment. "See? Not so bad to slow down for a second," Derek said, sitting up. "Back on Earth, I used to love looking at the night sky. It's what got me into space exploration in the first place." "You have mentioned your homeworld before," Elise said, "but you have not spoken much about it. What was it like?" Derek leaned back against the wall, folding his arms. "Depends on where you're from. Earth's got a bit of everything: mountains, deserts, forests, oceans. I grew up near the coast, so I spent a lot of time on the beach. Nights there were incredible. You'd just lie on the sand, look up at the stars, and wonder what else was out there." Elise tilted her head slightly, her glowing eyes focused on him. "And you found your answer." "Well, I found something," Derek said with a grin. "I didn't exactly expect to end up out here, helping an alien scientist fix her ship and outsmart a bunch of scavengers." Elise's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "I did not expect a human to play such a crucial role in my survival." "Guess we're both full of surprises," Derek said. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars drift past. Then Derek broke the quiet. "So, what about you? What's your homeworld like?" Elise's gaze softened as she spoke. "My world is different from yours. It is a place of symmetry, where nature and technology have coexisted for centuries. Our cities are integrated into the natural landscape, towering structures that blend with the forests and cliffs. The sky is often a pale shade of violet, and at night, the moons cast a soft, shimmering light over everything." "Sounds beautiful," Derek said. "It is," Elise replied, her voice quieter now. "But it is also rigid. There is little room for deviation, for experimentation outside of approved boundaries. That is why I left, to pursue my research without interference." Derek nodded. "I get that. Sometimes you have to step out of your comfort zone to find what you're really looking for." "Indeed," Elise said, glancing at him. "Though I did not expect my journey to lead me here, speaking with a human about home and stars." "Well, life's funny like that," Derek said, his grin returning. "Sometimes it takes a few wrong turns to find the right road." Elise looked at him for a moment longer, then returned her gaze to the window. "Your perspective is refreshing," Derek chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment." Another pause settled between them, but it was no longer the uneasy silence they had once shared. Instead, it felt more like an unspoken agreement, a moment of connection that didn't need words to explain. Chapter 7: The Human Element. The space station's central hall hummed with life. Delegates from various species filled the chamber, their distinct appearances and languages blending into a chaotic yet strangely cooperative atmosphere. Derek adjusted his jacket, feeling out of place amidst the dignitaries and scholars. "Do they always have to look so serious?" he muttered. Elise, standing beside him, replied without turning her head. "They are representatives of many civilizations. It is not merely formality. It is their way of showing respect." "Respect or intimidation?" Derek asked with a smirk. Perhaps both, she said, finally glancing at him. But if your words are as convincing as you seem to believe, it will not matter. No pressure then, Derek said. He folded his arms and looked out over the assembly. Just a room full of the galaxy's smartest minds, all waiting for a reason to tell me I'm wrong. You are not the one they doubt, Elise said quietly. They question me. Derek glanced at her. After everything we've been through, they still don't trust you? My work is unconventional, Elise admitted, and my decision to involve a human. Some see it as desperation rather than innovation. Derek frowned. You've got the data, though. The results. That should be enough to make them listen. Scientific results are not always enough, Elise said. Their approval requires more than evidence. It requires trust, and that is something I have yet to earn. Guess I'm not the only one feeling the pressure, Derek said. He gave her a reassuring smile. But hey, if they need a reason to trust you, maybe a little human charm will help. Elise arched a brow. Human charm? Sure, Derek said, his grin widening. We've got plenty of that. Now come on. Let's show them what we've got. Together, they walked toward the platform where the council members awaited. The chamber quieted as Elise began to speak. Esteemed colleagues, she began, her voice steady and clear. I am here to present findings that could benefit us all. The data I have collected during my independent research shows a potential solution to our shared biological challenges. With proper resources and collaboration, we can refine these methods, not only for my species but for others as well. She paused, scanning the faces of the council members. I am aware that my methods have been unorthodox. I have worked outside the traditional channels, and I have relied on unexpected allies. At that, she glanced briefly at Derek, who gave her an encouraging nod. I understand the skepticism that my work may provoke, Elise continued, but I ask that you consider the results. What I have achieved so far is only the beginning. With your support, we can take the next step together. The room remained silent for a moment, the delegates exchanging quiet murmurs. Finally, one of the council members, a tall figure with translucent skin and a halo of bioluminescent tendrils, spoke. Your research is intriguing, the delegate said, but why involve a human? Their technology and knowledge are limited. Derek stepped forward before Elise could respond. Limited, sure, he said, his tone confident. But we make up for that by being resourceful. Elise's work got a major boost because we worked together. 2 different approaches, 2 different sets of skills, finding a way forward. The delegate turned their luminous gaze on Derek. And you believe this cooperation justifies her methods? I believe it shows that the best results come from looking beyond our own borders, Derek said. We both took risks and it paid off. Isn't that what progress is all about? Another council member, this one with a crystalline exoskeleton, leaned forward. You speak as if this cooperation was easy. Surely there were challenges. Plenty, Derek said. But those challenges pushed us to think differently, to adapt. We didn't always agree, but we found common ground. And that's why I think her research is worth backing, because it's about more than just one species. It's about building something bigger. The chamber filled with a low hum of conversation as the council members deliberated. Elise and Derek stood side by side, waiting. Finally, the head delegate raised a hand, silencing the room. Dr. Zervala, the delegate said, we will grant your request for resources, but we will also monitor your progress closely. Do not disappoint us. Elise inclined her head respectfully. Thank you. As they left the chamber, Derek let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That wasn't so bad, he said. They are not easily convinced, Elise said. But you spoke well. I believe your words helped. Like I said, Derek replied with a grin. Human charm. Elise glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Perhaps there is something to it after all. Chapter 8. The road ahead. Derek stared out the viewport as the station receded into the distance, the faint glow of its hull fading among the stars. He leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed, deep in thought. Elise stepped into the room, her quiet footsteps almost silent on the deck plating. "You've been quiet since we left," she said. "Is something troubling you?" Derek shook his head, then shrugged. "Not troubled. Just thinking." "About what?" she asked, standing beside him to look out at the stars. "About how things turned out," Derek said. "You got the council's approval. You'll have the resources you need to push your research forward. That's the big win, right?" "Indeed," Elise said, though her tone was thoughtful. "It is a significant step." "But?" Derek asked, catching the subtle hesitation in her voice. "But it is only the beginning," Elise said. "There are still many challenges ahead. Scientific, logistical, and political. The council's support is conditional, and their expectations will be high." "Well, I don't see that as a problem," Derek said, turning to her with a small grin. "You're a brilliant scientist. If anyone can handle this, it's you." Elise regarded him for a moment before a faint smile crossed her lips. "Your confidence in me is reassuring." "Reassuring? That's high praise coming from you," Derek teased. "I'll take it." She allowed herself a brief chuckle, then looked back at the stars. "And what about you, Derek Callan? What will you do now that our paths are diverging?" Derek hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "I haven't really thought that far ahead. I mean, technically I'm still on assignment, though this whole detour probably wasn't in the mission briefing. Perhaps your superiors will appreciate your initiative," Elise suggested. He laughed. "That's one way of looking at it. I just hope they don't give me too much grief for getting involved in something way above my pay grade." Elise tilted her head. "You may have stepped beyond your original duties, but your actions made a significant difference. That should be acknowledged." "Thanks, Doc," Derek said, his tone sincere. "But honestly, I'm glad I did it. Not just because it worked out, but because, I don't know. I guess I feel like I actually contributed to something that matters." "You did," Elise said, her voice steady. "Your assistance was invaluable." They fell into a comfortable silence, the only sound the soft hum of the ship's systems. After a moment, Derek turned to her, his expression more serious. "Hey, I just wanted to say thanks for trusting me. I know I'm not exactly what you expected when you sent that distress call, but you exceeded my expectations," Elise said, cutting him off gently. "More than once." Derek blinked, then smiled. "Well, that's good to hear. It is the truth," she said, her tone softer now. "And for what it is worth, I am glad it was you who found me." "Same here," Derek said quietly. They stood there for a while longer, neither speaking, just watching the endless expanse of stars outside. Eventually, Elise straightened and turned toward the corridor. "I should prepare for the next stage of my work," she said. "The council's approval comes with strict deadlines." "Yeah, of course," Derek said, stepping back. "Good luck with all that. Not that you'll need it." Elise paused at the door, looking over her shoulder. "Derek." "Yeah?" he said, glancing up. "Take care of yourself out there," she said. "You too," he replied. And with that, she was gone, leaving Derek alone in the observation room. He sat down, leaning back against the wall, and stared out at the stars. He knew the future was uncertain, but somehow he felt okay with that. After all, he'd just been part of something incredible, and maybe, just maybe, there were more surprises waiting out there in the great unknown.